In the heart of Umiyama village, where the soil was rich and laughter was once common, lived a woman named Ginika. She was the envy of all, married to Obina, a man whose smile could melt the hardest of hearts. But their life, once so bright, was soon engulfed by a shadow of grief, so relentless that no one could explain it. It began on a hot afternoon at the farm. Ginika was harvesting cassava when a sharp pain seized her, and she collapsed. She lost her first child that day. The second loss happened by the stream, where the clear water ran red with her tears, as the other village women watched from a distance, too afraid to offer a hand. By her fifth loss, the village's pity had curdled into suspicious whispers. By the seventh, those whispers had sharpened into fear. And by her 10th, Ginika was no longer just a woman to the people of Umiyama, she was an abomination. They whispered that she was a witch, eating her own children in the womb. Children, echoing the cruelty of their parents, began to throw stones at her. The final blow came from her own husband. Pressured by the village elders who claimed that a man without an heir had no future, Obina took a second wife, a young woman named Nkechi. The day Nkechi's belly began to swell with new life was the day Ginika was completely erased from the village. She was banned from meetings. People would cross the path to avoid her shadow, as if it carried a plague. The woman who once had everything now had nothing but the crushing weight of her own sorrow. Obina's house, once her home, now felt like a stranger's, filled with the triumphant laughter of his new wife and the scornful glances of his family. Ginika was alone, a ghost in her own life, haunted by the babies she never held and the love she had lost. Her peace was not just shattered, it was ground into dust. Isolated and broken, Ginika found her only solace at a lonely, abandoned well, hidden deep in the tall grasses at the edge of the village. It was a place no one else dared to go, a place forgotten by time. There she could finally let her grief pour out. She would scream at the heavens, her voice raw with anguish, demanding to know why hope was given to her, time and time again, only to be violently snatched away. Her cries were swallowed by the silent fields, her tears absorbed by the thirsty ground. One morning, as the mist clung to the grass, a figure emerged from the haze. It was a bent, mysterious old woman named Mama Odara. The villagers believed she was mad, a woman who spoke to spirits and wandered the bush. But her eyes held a sharpness that cut through the fog of her reputation. She looked at Ginika, not with pity, but with a deep, knowing calm. "The gods will answer you soon," Mama Odara whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "But the miracle you pray for will not look like what you expect." Days passed. Ginika clung to those cryptic words, a tiny spark of hope flickering in the darkness of her despair. She returned to the well, her heart a tangled knot of fear and anticipation. She lowered her bucket into the cool darkness of the well. As she began to pull it up, she felt an impossible weight, as if the earth itself were pulling back. She strained, her muscles screaming in protest, her palms raw and bloodied against the rough rope. With a final, desperate heave, she hauled the bucket over the edge. But there was no water. Instead, sitting calmly inside, wrapped in a simple cloth, was a baby girl. Her skin glowed like the first light of dawn, and her eyes held the wisdom of the stars. Ginika's heart stopped. She stared at the child, this impossible gift from the depths of the earth. She scooped the baby into her arms, clutching her to her chest. Her tragedy was over. Her prayers were answered. She ran back towards the village, her feet flying over the familiar path, tears of joy streaming down her face. She was no longer barren. She was a mother. She would show them, Alobina and Nkechi, the elders, the entire village. They would see this miracle, and they would finally understand. But Umiyama was a village blinded by its own fear. When Ginika burst into the village square, holding the child aloft, she was not met with cheers, but with gasps of horror. Obina, her husband, was the first to speak. His voice was cold and sharp as he pointed a trembling finger. "It is a river demon," he shouted. The village priests, their faces masks of terror, agreed. They ordered the child to be returned to the depths from which she came. Before Ginika could protest, strong hands seized her. They tore the baby from her grasp and forced the small, glowing child back into the wooden bucket. As they began to lower the bucket back into the well, a sound like a clap of thunder shook the very ground. The rope snapped. A tiny laugh echoed from the darkness below, and in an instant a furious dust storm rose from the earth, choking the village. The sky turned a sickly yellow. Chickens dropped dead in their tracks, and a bone-chilling cold settled over the land. The elders, terrified by this display of power, gave Ginika a final, cruel choice: leave Omiyama before sunrise, or be killed alongside the demon child. That night, with the baby she named Kizaba strapped to her back, Ginika walked away from the only home she had ever known, disappearing into the darkness. Her journey led her to Umari, a village so poor that the houses leaned on each other for support, and the crops were little more than dust. But here, where hunger was a constant companion, Ginika found something she hadn't seen in years: mercy. The villagers of Umari, who had nothing, shared what little they had. They saw a desperate mother and a hungry child, not a curse. They gave her a small hut and a barren patch of land near the market. And as Kisoba grew, the land of Umari began to change. The transformation was slow at first, then miraculous. At age 3, the little girl touched the eyes of an old man who had been blind for years, and he saw the sun for the first time. At age 5, she was found whispering to the dry earth, and overnight, the cracked barren fields turned a vibrant green, bursting with yams and maize. Hunger vanished from Umwari. The village bloomed, its markets overflowing with a bounty that drew traders from miles away. This sudden prosperity did not go unnoticed. It drew the attention of the region's greedy ruler, Okafor. He saw Kaisoba not as a miracle, but as a tool, a personal source of power and wealth. He demanded that Ginika hand over the girl. When she refused, he sent his royal guards to kidnap Kaisoba, but as the guards burst into their small hut, an invisible force threw them back, sending them sprawling in the dust. And then they heard Chisoba's voice, no longer that of a child, but ancient and powerful, resonating in the air around them. "I forgive you today," the voice warned, "but do not touch the light again." Meanwhile, back in Umiyama, the village that had rejected them was dying. A curse had taken root in the land they had so proudly protected. The rains, when they came, brought rot instead of life. The fields yielded nothing but stones and withered stalks. The women became barren, their wombs as empty as Ginika's once were. And Obina, the husband who had turned his back on his wife and his own child, woke up one morning to a world of complete and utter darkness. He was blind, desperate, and starving. The elders of Umiyama made the long journey to Umari. They found Ginika at the now bustling market, a woman they hardly recognized, her face no longer etched with grief, but with quiet strength. They knelt in the dust before the very woman they had once stoned, begging for Kaisoba to come and heal their cursed land and their blind people. Ginika looked down at them, her memory replaying every insult, every stone, every whisper. Her heart was a cold, hard knot, and she said no. But Kaisoba, the child of the well, had one final lesson to teach her mother. She began to sneak into Umiyama at night, a small shadow moving through the dying village, touching the sick, healing them in secret. When Ginika found out and confronted her, Chisoba's words were gentle but firm. "I was not sent to punish, mother, I was sent to test mercy." People create their own punishment through their pride. Kaisoba gathered the people of both villages at the edge of the abandoned well in Umiyama. In a flash of blinding light, she forced them all to see a vision of their own cruelty. The people of Umiyama watched themselves laughing while Ginika cried, saw themselves throwing stones, saw their fear turn to hate. Many fell to their knees, not in fear of her power, but in genuine, soul-crushing repentance for what they had done.